Hi, welcome back to Herbs for Health. This is week 5 here in the Concrete Gardens, and today we're looking at a number of different plants, including quite a few from the rose family, or Rosaceae. People are probably familiar with it. There's quite a lot of different plants in the rose family, including roses, and we've got one rose we're saving for next week as well, because it also comes into the berries kind of one. So the first plant we're going to look at is this massive thing here. Now this is wood avens, or Gaium urbanum, and you can just see there's one little yellow flower still left on it, but most of it has gone to seed, and these sort of prickly little, quite pretty burrs are the seeds, and these either kind of fly off and pollinate in the wind or attach to things, and it means that the plant can kind of move around the place a bit. But the bit of the wood avens that we're actually looking at today is the roots. Now these have been uprooted from the garden here with permission. This tends to grow as a weed, so you probably will definitely find people who'd be interested in letting you pull it up for them. If you kind of squish the root and smell it, you sometimes even don't need to, just pulling it out of the ground. It has a very strong clove smell, and that's because in the root, and actually some in the rest of the plant, but mainly in the root, there's a chemical called eugenol, and that's the same chemical that's the active constituent of clove. So you can use wood avens in the same way that you would use clove oil, but it's a lot milder, so it's easier to take it as a tea, because clove essential oil is quite strong. So I have made a tea of some dried roots that I dried in the spring, and just popped them in, put some hot water on top, and had it covered just there, and it's got a really nice kind of deep colour and has a definite taste of cloves. So if you've ever used clove oil, it's very commonly used for teeth infections and gum infections, and that's exactly what you can use the wood avens root for. So you can just break off a little bit of this root. Usually what I do is leave it sitting somewhere to dry for a while, and then most of the soil just kind of comes off. You can break off a little bit of root and chew it, and that'll be quite helpful. Or you can dry it totally and then powder it and just kind of apply it to areas that are painful as well, always making sure to keep everything really clean. But the other big use of wood avens would be more for a tea, which is for stomach problems, particularly in the large intestine. And it's another plant that's astringent, so it's drying. So if you can imagine why you might need drying in your intestines, obviously if you've got diarrhea, so often from some sort of food poisoning, and that drying and then the antiseptic kind of action of the eugenol really kind of helps to settle the stomach. So anytime where people are, like if someone's been abroad and had a kind of bit of food poisoning that's particularly unusual and infective, that's a really good one. It's also something that you can use a lot of the time when people are detoxing from certain drugs. Their guts can get pretty turmoiled as well, so it's quite a nice one for that as well. And it's another kind of plant that grows wild that has a really nice distinctive taste, so you genuinely could use that the way you use cloves in baking and things like that as well. So Gaium urbanum, so this is one of the rose family. Now one of the things about the rose family is this to me does not look anything like the kind of rose you would see planted in a garden, so you really just have to know which is which. It's almost impossible sometimes for me, unless you know the plants, to tell if it is a rose, but that is one. So it's wood avens, Gaium urbanum, and it's in the Rosaceae. The next plant that we're going to look at is the one that isn't in Rosaceae, but I just thought it's looking, now this was looking a little bit better yesterday when I picked it, but this is a plant called Feverfew. It has these daisy-like heads that people are familiar with, but quite different leaves. Like a lot of plants, you maybe describe this as having like an oak leaf. It's an incredibly distinctive smell, in fact quite overpowering, so it's almost impossible to misidentify it once you know what it smells like. Now Feverfew, although it's called Feverfew, we don't tend to use it to treat fevers. We don't tend to treat fevers very much these days anyway. It's a bit of a kind of lost art. But what it is used a lot for is migraine headaches. It's an unusual one in that a proportion of people who have migraines, it works 100% for them, and for some people it just doesn't. And I think maybe we've just not worked out how to differentiate between all the different types of migraine, because it would be really difficult to predict. But if someone is suffering from migraines, it's worth giving Feverfew a go, because if it works, that can make such a big difference. Now the ideal way to take Feverfew is to take a fresh leaf, so one fresh leaf every day. So obviously that would mean you need 365 leaves of Feverfew for your year. Now there are fresh leaves on it for quite a lot of of the year, but whenever there aren't fresh leaves, what you can do is flash freeze, which means you get a large tray and put individual leaves on the tray separated apart from each other, pop that in a freezer, and then when they've all frozen, you just take them off the tray and put them in a bag, and then you can take one of those leaves every day. You would ideally, it's quite strong, it's quite bitter, it's quite aromatic. So what you would ideally do is take a leaf with a little bit of bread wrapped around it and eat that, which starts to kind of cover the flavour, but it also means it won't have a negative effect on your stomach because it'll be, the bread kind of bulks it out a little bit. Otherwise, it can be quite a kind of harsh thing to take. But I thought it might be nice to try and think of another way that we could use Feverfew that doesn't involve having to store lots of leaves and remember to take something every day and all that kind of thing. Have a bit of bread ready at all times. So I'm going to try and make an infused oil with this. Now I'm going to use the water bath method or the bain-marie for this. So what I'm going to do is chop these into this bowl first of all. So this is probably just the easiest way. Now the leaf is the bit that's used purely medicinally, but the flowers have pretty much the same constituents and characteristics, so I'm going to chop those in there as well. Feverfew is a very tenacious plant, so it just kind of comes and comes. So as each set of flowers turns to seed, there'll be more of the plant coming up behind. So like I say, except for in maybe like 3-4 months of the year, you generally see Feverfew around. So what I've done here is I'll show you this. So I've taken this saucepan and I've put a saucer that just fits inside, and then we're going to place some water in there and then place this on top, and it just keeps it a little bit more steady and it stops it kind of burning as well. So if I put the hot water in, and this is probably going to take a while. So instead of leaving this oil sitting on a sunny windowsill, on occasions when you do not have a sunny windowsill, you can do this instead, and that means that you can basically leave this to infuse for a couple of hours and then decant it and it's ready to use. And then you can use that as a temple rub for headaches. So this is the first time trying it as that. So what I'm going to do is get us some oil. Now, see, you want to just really cover the plant. And this is going to make a nice rich thick oil with the olive oil there. And then my next trick, maybe just health and safety my scarf away. Yep, that's definitely on. So we just pop this on here and pop this on, and you want the water to be coming up the sides a little bit so that you can so that it's sort of submerged and so that that's all starting to mingle there. So you just need to keep that on a medium heat. You don't want it to be boiling or even simmering, just a nice warm temperature so that you don't burn the oil. And we're going to put a cover on that and then leave that for a couple of hours. And then we're going to, afterwards what we'll do is, I've got my apple holding this in place, we're going to decant that through the muslin and the sieve into this jug here, and then use that to fill this little glass jar. So do that later on. Okay, so that was Feverfew, Tanacetum parthenium. It's in the Asteraceae family, which is the daisy family, which is unsurprising since it's got those daisy-like flowers. There's a lot. I think that's the biggest plant family, botanical plant family that there is. So there's a lot in that family as well. So the next thing that we're going to look at are these little berries. I don't know if you can see them there. So you might be familiar with this. There's a lot of red berries around at this time of year, and there's a lot of people worry about them because they feel like they worry about getting the correct one. This is Hawthorn berry. The Latin name is Crataegus, is the first name. Now, as I've been saying about Latin names of things, they usually have two names. These do have two names, but there are so many varieties of them. So what I have here are ones that I've picked from 3 different trees. So one has like tiny little leaves on this one, And then this one's kind of got medium-sized leaves, which could be the same as this one, but the shape's slightly different. And the reason for that is that this is a tree, if people aren't familiar with hawthorn, and it's referred to as a very promiscuous plant. And that means that all the different species can interbreed with each other really easily. So you get new versions of hawthorn coming around all the time, and they are all medicinal. So the handy thing is that you don't need to know which one you've got, you just need to know that you've got hawthorn. So the berries are quite distinctive. Because this is in the rose family, it might feel familiar from kind of other things, like there's a wee bit on the end that's kind of like a pear, and when you take it off, you know they're ripe because there should be like a little bit of give in them. And then if you just take your thumbnail and squeeze, they should just sort of come off quite happily. And if you see this one will squish quite a lot. And when you look inside, there's a kind of this flesh inside and a massive stone. So there's very little flesh to stone ratio in a hawthorn berry. But I've got a load here. I'm going to pop this one in with it. Now hawthorn, so Crataegus species, so that might be Crataegus monogyna, Crataegus heterogyna. There's all kinds of different ones. It's a very good heart medicine. So the berries in particular are really good for the heart muscle, and you kind of the thing called the doctrine of signatures, where sometimes plants look like the things that they're helpful for, and that nice deep red helps you remember that it's for the heart. What it does is it normalizes blood pressure. So if you've got high blood pressure, it'll bring it to normal. If you've got low blood pressure, it'll bring it to normal. It's referred to as amphoteric, and the reason that it does that, because that sounds kind of like it might be a load of nonsense, is that it makes the heart muscle work better. So it's got your heart will be pumping in a more efficient fashion with the hawthorn. You can also use hawthorn flowers, which obviously are from earlier in the year. And actually these leaves, the hawthorn leaves, are edible, but they're not, at this time of year, they're a bit thick and chewy. They do give you a bit of a facial workout if you want to try to eat them. So with the hawthorn berries, we want to extract all the goodness, all the chemicals that are in there, that lovely red colour. And one way to do that is to make an infused vinegar. So this is maybe a third full, so you could put about maybe halfway up with the hawthorn berries, and then add your vinegar. And as we said before, with vinegar you can actually put quite a lot of the plant matter in, because the vinegar will start to preserve it immediately. So it might happen before we end the session, but the colour changes really quite quickly whenever you put hawthorn berries into vinegar. So that's our kind of rich colour of our apple cider vinegar, which is with the mother in it. But the colour will leach out of those berries really quite quickly, and then that's starting to get the goodness into the vinegar. You can't, I would say, leave that in a dark place for 2 to 4 weeks, strain, and then you can use that as a tonic if you feel like it'd be good as a heart tonic. It's also more so the flowers, but also the berries. It's often something I would prescribe in a tea for people who are dealing with loss and grief. So it's kind of for the heart, both in a sort of physical way and a kind of metaphysical way. And definitely look out for the flowers in the spring, because they make a lovely tea as well. But yes, that's our hawthorn. And hawthorn is, again, in the rose family, Rosaceae, and quite a lot of rose family's plants, so things like plums and nectarines and peaches are in the rose family, and they have like a big stone in the middle with soft flesh outside, so that's one of the characteristics. But unlike with the mint, where there's some quite clear characteristics you can see in every single mint, I struggle to identify what makes something a rose. So many things seem to be roses, but they're often medicinal as well, or edible, so there is quite an interesting family of plants. And so our final herb, plant, whatever, is actually hopefully something that's very familiar to everybody. You remember this from earlier. Apples. Now, traditionally these are cooking apples, which are good to use. Traditionally it would be crab apples, which are really kind of small. And what we're going to do is make our own vinegar with them. So I've chopped some of these in advance, and obviously they probably don't look very appetizing if you were thinking of eating them. But actually they need to be bruised a little, because what we're doing is we're fermenting these apple chunks to make apple cider vinegar. Now, the kind of apple cider vinegar that you'd be able to make at home would not be strong enough to preserve other things, but it does make a really nice drink to take as a kind of tonic on a regular basis. So I'm just going to chop a bit more of this, and then so this one will be nicely brown, and So those will start to brown up a bit more once they're set next to the other ones. I think that's probably enough. So what we're going to do is you can add a little bit of the apple cider vinegar that you've got already to kickstart things, and I think that might be a nice idea to do that. You can sometimes also, if you're using something like crab apples, you might want to add a tiny bit of sugar because they don't really have much flesh to speak of. So the reason I started using crab apples in the past for doing this is the recipe I came across said you use the skin and cores of apples that you're already using the flesh for, like for a pie or crumble or something. And basically windfall crab apples are pretty much nothing but skin and core and maybe a load of bruises, which is also good for that. So what we're doing, so we've got a wee bit of cider vinegar in there. Now I'm just going to pour in some purified water. So if you use tap water, you've not done anything to, it can kind of interfere with the fermentation, because obviously there's chlorine in tap water. And I don't know about you, but I sometimes feel like when I'm turning on the tap in my house that like some mornings it smells more chlorine-y than others, and people have different theories about maybe they put more chlorine in when it's been really rainy or something. I don't know. But anyway, the chlorine is not great for the fermentation process. So if you want to purify your water, simplest way in terms of like requiring no additional equipment is to simply put it in a pan, boil it, and then leave it to sit somewhere to cool, and that will have kind of boiled off a lot of the stuff. The option that I tend to use is activated charcoal. So it's a little black rod that you put in, and that purifies the water in about 4 hours if you leave it in the fridge. And the little charcoal things are £3, £4, £5 online. So we're going to fill this up. You don't really need to be so careful with this because we were going to use another method rather than just hoping it will stay under the surface. So obviously with other things that we've done, including like oils and vinegars, you're sort of hoping that most of the plant material stays below the surface. As you can see with this, these have risen up. Oh, my hand's in the way. So these have risen up and a lot of them are poking above the surface. So that's not really going to work because those are just going to go mouldy, because we want to leave this for a week or two to kind of get going. So what we can do is take another smaller jar and force it down. And now you can see that all of the apple is below the surface, and trust me, the stuff at the back is as well. And I'm letting that sit for a wee minute and just let the bubbles come out, because there's air bubbles around the place. And then what we do is you take a piece of muslin. I could take a bigger piece actually. So you take a piece of muslin. You could just do this with a tea towel or a kitchen roll. You could just about get away with, but if it starts to bubble up, you end up with the kitchen roll potentially ripping. So what I tend to do is set that on a bowl which has a bit of a lip on it, so that if there's any overspill, you don't make a mess of your kitchen. So you put that round so that the small jar stays in place and keeps all the apples below the surface. So you can see that here. Now you will get the odd pip and things rise to the top, so it's a good idea to check it every day and push those back down or lift them out if you want, and also to maybe try a little bit of it every day so that you're getting to see if it's getting to the kind of fizzy phase. But if you're very lucky and you've got really good conditions in your kitchen that are good for making apple cider vinegar, it might even start to overflow. So that's why you don't want to fill it too much, and just check the positioning of your little jar every day as well, just to make sure that it's still holding everything underneath. Obviously apple cider vinegar, very safe. You will maybe see things, there's sometimes things going around about the pips having hydrogen cyanide in them, and that can be a problem, but it's absolutely fine to ferment it like this, and the pips are not an issue at all. But this is also another kind of lovely member of the rose family. So that's everything from this session. Thanks very much.